Okay, so when I was about 6, I was channel surfing at my grandma's house when I came across this terrifying image of a scary looking, demon-faced monster rising out of a pool of blood. Like the very brave child that I was who could totally handle horror that last ran Scream 2, I won't have nightmares of the balcony death scene for weeks. I just went nope and thought that was the end of that. Fast forward to me being only a couple of years past needing my dad to be in the room so I could watch Goosebumps. I'm in bed channel surfing again and suddenly there's this girl covered in blood, crying in a closet saying that she didn't mean it over and over again. Once more I was like, that's a no for me, dog, and tried to erase that image from my brain. But then about a year later, there I was again looking for something to watch when I find this show I believed I had never seen before. It was this episode where all the main characters had lost their memory and were trying to survive being chased down by vampires. I had no larger context for it, but hey, it was funny. I liked the characters, the action was fun, the dialogue was witty, and oh my god, did I find gays? I liked what I saw that night so much that I came back to it whenever I could, eventually learning two things. One, there was clearly a huge chunk of missing episodes right in the middle of the series, and two, this was a show that had scared the hell out of me in two separate yet memorable occasions. That show, of course, was Charmed. No, it was Buffy. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. So, obligatory summary for the uninitiated. Buffy the Vampire Slayer was a show created by Joss Whedon that ran for 7 seasons from 1997 to 2003. It's genre TV, meaning it has elements of everything: horror, fantasy, sci-fi, action, romance, drama. The series stars Sarah Michelle Gellar as Buffy, aka the Slayer, aka the only person in the world who has the power to save humanity from vampires, demons, and the forces of darkness. Being a remake/sort of sequel to the 1992 movie of the same name, which I have like one interesting scene. Maybe one and a half because of baby Luke Perry. Throughout 7 seasons, Buffy used supernatural creatures as metaphors to real-life horrors, which was both the best creative decision anyone has ever made, and pretty much how a series with such a B-movie premise developed into one of the most interesting, nuanced, and well-written shows of all times. Like all of my interests, my love for Buffy quickly became an obsession that consumed my every waking hour. And scouring through fan forums in a pre-Wikipedia world, I soon got confirmation that yeah, the reruns I was watching were skipping seasons 4, 5, and later 6. It wasn't until Christmas 2005 when I finally got my hands on the complete series DVD box set and was able to watch the entire show all the way through. However, by then I was already aware of how ironic it was that the episode responsible for hooking me in was Tabula Rasa, since, thanks to my participation in those aforementioned fan forums, it took about 5 minutes of browsing for me to learn that the season that episodes from, season 6, was and still is very, very controversial amongst fans. Buffy season 6 is dark. It's the darkest, bleakest the show has ever gotten, with the notable exception of season 5's The Body, but that one wasn't episodes, and this was a full 22 episode journey. I don't think anybody has ever described Buffy as pure fluff and fun, but season 6 was miserable, and it caused a bunch of fans to claim that the show had been ruined forever. I won't really argue with that because that comes down to personal opinion, but I will spend the next several minutes telling you why I love this season so much, and how it speaks to me so personally. Okay, so like I said, Buffy used demons and the supernatural as metaphors for the real-life horrors of growing up. The guy who changes after we have sex with him, parents who live vicariously through their children, dealing with bullying, authority figures, etc. But this time, instead of tackling the horrors of life, it was decided that life itself would be the big bad. For 5 years we followed Buffy as she went through one traumatic event after the other, being changed by them, sure, but never really losing her resilient and mostly cheerful personality. In season 5, Buffy finds out her sister Dawn wasn't really her sister, but a mystical key turned human by its protectors, who altered the memories of Buffy and everyone else who ever came into contact with her or her family, to remember her as always being there. The episode she learns this ends with Buffy accepting her responsibility as Dawn's new protector from Glory, the season's big bad, who turns out to be an actual god. Meanwhile, Buffy's mother Joyce is dealing with a brain tumor, a very serious and very real problem not caused by supernatural forces, thus being something Buffy can't really do anything about. Joyce undergoes surgery to remove the tumor and seemingly recuperates really well, but just when Buffy and we the audience are feeling safe enough in the belief that Joyce is out of the woods, Buffy comes home to find her mother's corpse in the living room couch, victim of a fatal aneurysm as a complication from her procedure, thus putting Buffy in the position of being the sole provider for Dawn and the one responsible for raising her while trying to keep her safe from Glory. At the end of the season, after Dawn's been captured and Glory is preparing to open an interdimensional portal which will unleash literal hell on Earth, Buffy, feeling the weight of all the bad that has happened in her life, particularly in the past year, well,
I don't know how to live in this world if these are the choices. If everything just gets stripped away. I don't see the point.
This moment right here really laid the groundwork to be explored in the following year. This is when Buffy's depression storyline really began. The series ends with Buffy sacrificing herself to save her sister and the world. A sad ending, but one worthy of the hero she was. Except we've been picked up for 2 more seasons, and that's not really the end of the series, so what to? Season 6 premiere. Buffy's friends are in denial about Buffy being really gone, believing her to be trapped in a hell dimension being tortured for eternity. By courtesy of one hell of a powerful witch and really dark magic, they resurrect her, and at first Buffy's detached, clearly traumatized behavior and refusal to speak about where she'd been seem to imply they were right. Buffy even says so.
I was in hell.
But then one scene later,
I was happy. Wherever I was happy. But I think I was in heaven. I was torn out of there. Pulled out by my friends. Everything here is hard, and bright, and violent. Everything I feel, everything I touch, this is hell. Just getting through the next moment, and the one after that, knowing what I've lost.
although I already knew how this was gonna go, I was still unsure of how I would feel actually watching this season for the first time, after reading so many diverging but mostly negative opinions about its overall tone and Buffy's main storyline. And how I felt was seen. As in, I finally understood what I was going through. There is a name for it, and as it turns out, I'm not alone. When I was about 12, I started exhibiting symptoms of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. A common, chronic, and long-lasting disorder in which a person has uncontrollable, reoccurring thoughts, obsessions, and/or behaviors, compulsions, that he or she feels the urge to repeat over and over. OCD is an emotionally and psychologically draining anxiety disorder that lowers one's quality of life and puts them at a higher risk of suicide. In 2007, once my symptoms had gotten me to the point I could barely function in my daily life, I finally, yet reluctantly sought professional help, and my therapist confirmed to me what I'd already suspected for the past couple of years after identifying so much with what Buffy had gone through. I also had depression. What I remember hearing about depression before sitting down to watch season 6 was that depression was a deep sadness, which, yeah, that's part of it, but just calling it that is at the minimum reductive, and I always thought that definition was a little confusing. Like, I'd been very sad before, but which barometer do we measure the levels of sadness by until we get to the depression scale? I also believed from what I'd been told that all you had to do to get over it was to, well, get over it. Want the sadness to go away? Be happy. That's still a very common, widely believed myth about depression. A lot of people still think of it as less of an actual illness and more as another emotion, the extreme of sad. Which is why when I saw Buffy depicting it as I was learning it to be by virtue of having it, i.e. hard, alienating, consuming, destructive, incapacitating and ever-present like a chronic injury invisible to everyone else. The routine you fall into, the lack of energy, motivation, and the reclusiveness that you impose on yourself without noticing, and how it all makes your day start feeling the same. Yeah, I'm sure it would be a lot cheaper for the writers to just hold a mirror to my face. Depression is contradictory. It's hollow and full. It's feeling too much and feeling nothing at all. It's feeling like you're not really living, only existing. Or as the show put it, going through the motions. Losing all my drive. What I didn't know then was that Buffy's depression storyline was actually trying to teach me a bunch of other lessons that might have saved me a lot of hurts if they hadn't gone over my head. You see, when you have two moods, pain or emptiness, you cling to whatever distracts you from them. You want to feel something, anything good, sometimes just anything, and that often leads you to start chasing instant gratifications, and later having to deal with the long-term consequences of these momentary highs. For those of you who've seen the show, no, I'm not gonna talk about Willow's addiction arc. Not today and possibly ever. It was not the best for a myriad of reasons, but mostly because it contradicts everything magic was previously established to be in the show, with all the subtlety and finesse of those comics that try to teach kids about the dangers of bullying or pot or whatever.
Who's your supplier?
No, what I'm actually gonna talk about is Buffy's relationship with Spike.
You afraid I'm gonna...
In season 5, Spike realizes he's in love with Buffy, her reaction to it being what you'd expect from learning a literally soulless murderer who's physically and emotionally terrorized you and your friends for years is in love with you.
I love you.
Oh my god.
By the time this happens, Spike has had a chip implanted in his brain, keeping him from hurting anyone with a soul, but he's still very much a demon. That's not to say he and other demons are incapable of love. The series had established that way back in season 2 with Spike and Drusilla, and Spike himself shows throughout the last 3 seasons that he genuinely cares for Buffy and Dawn, even if that caring is often intermingled with his desire to get on Buffy's good side, to often comical results.
You want credit for not feeding off bleeding disaster victims?
Well, yeah.
Worthy of note is how the series had already hinted at how abusive and destructive a romantic relationship between Spike and Buffy would be, more than once actually.
You'll really like him. Well, nobody really likes him.
I just need to clear a few things up.
I don't even really like him.
Spike is a monster, and Buffy makes it clear she would never in her right mind get involved with him.
The only chance you had with me was when I was unconscious.
Except in season 6, Buffy's not in her right mind. What I personally love about this pairing is how the writers would constantly depict it as the deeply toxic, destructive relationship that it was, even if we have to sex it up a little bit because it's TV. Buffy was so desperate to escape her pain and numb her depression that she was willing to get involved with someone she knew was evil and no good for her. All of that because she needed to feel. Feel wanted, feel loved, feel pleasure, feel anything but empty and broken and miserable. Even if afterwards that was exactly how she knew she would feel, with the added bonus of guilt over what she's done, plus the burden of keeping it a secret so the ones who loved her wouldn't find out just how low she had really sunk. This was an abusive relationship.
I was a little bit surprised that people didn't have more to say about the fact that these two people are beating each other up before they go and engage in the making of the dove. Of course, it makes perfect sense. These are two characters who have always interacted in a violent way.
From the get-go, it was made clear that Buffy was using Spike as a form of self-medication and emotional self-harm, and that Spike was taking advantage of Buffy's psychological state of depression to get what he wanted, i.e. Buffy. Given how toxic this thing was from the start, it's no wonder it quickly progressed into domestic abuse. First emotionally, and then...
No.
You love me.
Oh, no, stop it.
The truth about toxic relationships and domestic violence is that they don't start out bad, and even when they get there, it's not all bad all the time. That's what makes them so difficult to leave, and for the people involved to even recognize them as abusive in the first place. Your abuser can be caring, sweet, and kind to you, but it only takes a small thing for them to get violent. And the knowledge of their violence and of what they're capable of is a big reason why people don't just leave these relationships. When Buffy left Spike, he tried to rape her, and he probably would have succeeded had she not been a super strong superhero. You know, that thing people aren't in real life. After that, Spike leaves town to get the chip in his brain removed with the intention of coming back and killing Buffy, an all too real, all too common way in which domestic violence tends to culminate. Oh, and by the way the show links Buffy's feelings of isolation from the one she loves to how domestic abusers tend to purposely alienate their partners from the rest of the world so they have no one to turn to, no one in their lives with their abuser, is nothing short of painfully real.
You're a creature of the darkness, like me. What would they think of you if they found out all the things you've done?
This emotional dependency is what made Buffy stay in this relationship for as long as she did, as real people in this situation often do. Which is why, as someone who has gone through this, I always feel a little uncomfortable when people romanticize this point of their relationship. If it's your poison, fine. I know for a lot of people who grew up with the show, this was baby's first railing. I just dislike seeing it. I do think there's no denying that Buffy felt something for Spike in season 6. I just see it for what I believe the show was trying to do, showing a deeply damaged, emotionally fragile woman entering a toxic relationship and staying due to an emotional dependency and a need for relief from her pain. This isn't love. This is not how love is supposed to be. In fact, it's only love in the way an addict loves their object of addiction.
I have feelings for you. I do. But it's not love. I could never trust you enough for it to be love.
And by the way, don't think I'm overlooking how Buffy was toxic and emotionally abusive towards Spike too. This is actually the most nuanced part of this whole thing. She took advantage of his desire and love for her to manipulate and use him for her own gain as well.
Get dressed if you can find your clothes and push off, because if I can't have all of you, I'd rather... Hey, that's cheating.
Because in some cases, toxic relationships aren't a one-way street.
You got a willing slave, and you just love to play the thought that you might misbehave.
I'm particularly grateful for the writers having included this, the lesson on how just because you're hurting and or dealing with mental illness, it does not mean you're incapable of being selfish and inflicting pain onto others yourself, nor does it give you a carte blanche to do so. We are still responsible for our actions. Like Buffy, I learned this the hard way. Let me make something clear. Buffy hates herself during season 6. She truly hates herself. And she keeps on making decisions that make her hate herself more and more, digging herself into a hole of self-loathing. In the episode Dead Things, it's revealed that Spike can physically hurt Buffy, which remember he was not supposed to be able to do. So believing she came back wrong somehow, she asks Tara to help her figure it out. However, at the end of the episode, Tara reveals that there's nothing wrong with her, mystically speaking. And that's when Buffy completely comes undone.
I didn't come back wrong.
I promise, there's nothing wrong with you.
There has to be. This can't be me. It isn't me.
Truth is, Buffy was hoping that she'd come back wrong. She was hoping there was an external force beyond her control to justify and explain her actions throughout the season, including her suffering and her willingness to use and be used by Spike.
Why do I feel like this? Why do I let Spike do those things to me?
Except there wasn't one. Her pain was real, her depression was real, but the choices she made were her own.
Using him? What's okay about that?
Okay, writing the script for this episode, I really am trying not to completely spill my guts over the internet, but suffice to say, I relate to Buffy's reaction here a lot. This scene breaks me every time I watch it. To me, it's one of the realest moments of the series and one of the most important hard truths I learned from it.
Tell me that I'm wrong, please. Please don't forgive me. Please.
It's so easy to lose yourself in mental illness. Even after all this time, I still struggle with reminding myself I am not my depression and I am not my OCD. I am not my intrusive thoughts. But I am accountable for the decisions I make. If I lash out at someone in the middle of a depressive episode or me not being able to shut my brain off, yeah, there's something there that caused my behavior, but I still am in control of my actions. It would be so much easier if I could let myself believe all of the bad in my life is simply my mental disorder's fault, that I'm not the one in charge of my life because there's something wrong with me. And for a long time, I did. But even though, yes, there is something wrong with me, it's not of the I can't be held responsible for my actions variety. Don't get me wrong, OCD and depression are two incredibly incapacitating disorders, and they can and do influence my actions. But I'm not talking about how sometimes I can barely manage to get out of bed in the morning, or the rituals of repetition I perform to try and acquiesce my obsessive anxieties. I'm talking about the way I treat others, and the self-sabotage of losing yourself in bad habits and wrong people, all for the sake of a momentary relief. I can look at mental illness to understand the why of those, but not to justify them. Recognizing and admitting that is painful. It requires you to face yourself, to admit you also have the capacity of inflicting harm, to take the responsibility away from an intangible, invisible big bad and reclaim it for yourself. I am responsible for my own toxic behavior. Things haven't been good lately. A lot of it is due to my mental disorders getting the best of me for the past few months, but part of it is brought on by the fact there is a lot of bad going on nowadays, and everything feels too overwhelming. The world is just too much. Social media means we're now bombarded with every terrible piece of news happening in the world 24/7. And it's easy to feel crushed by the endless outpour of cruelty, corruption, and disaster showing up non-stop on our devices, every day, all the time. And for the ones amongst us who are already predisposed to feeling too much, this overload of badness can be absolutely paralyzing. Everything is hard, and right, and violent. I wish I could say I've had an epiphany. I wish I was on a TV show so a writer could neatly resolve my mental health arc as the season comes to a close. But I'm not. Mental illness is a difficult thing to go through and even more difficult to overcome. In my specific case, you can't really cure depression and you can't really cure OCD. A successful treatment means managing my symptoms to the point they no longer incapacitate me and interfere with my functionality. For both disorders, medication and therapy are the best and most recommended methods of getting there, and I'm currently going through both. But in case you were wondering about this 3-month hiatus of mine, well, it's still been difficult for me to get anything done. Even sitting down to watch a movie or a TV show has felt like an impossible task demanding of an insurmountable amount of energy I simply don't have. And here's the saddest, coldest truth of them all. There is comfort to be found in your own sadness. Having lived with depression for such a long period of time, I honestly can't remember what it was like living without it. In seeing some ways out, such as creating, socializing, exercising, eating better, having a healthy sleep schedule, ditching unhealthy coping mechanisms, and interacting with the outside world more often so I'm no longer stuck spending all my time listening to those voices that keep me hurting. Frankly, it is so much easier to just not take them. The idea of feeling better is desirable to me, but the reality of making it happen can be truly terrifying. Sure, I'm suffering now, but at least I'm where it's familiar and comfortable, unlike the pain I encounter by walking the long, unknown road of recovery.
You're not drawn to the dark like I thought. You're addicted to the misery.
So why bother? Why not just stay here? Why not just give in to my darkness? Because I want to see the sun rise again. I'm one of the lucky ones. Not only can I afford medication and therapy, but I actually have enough time and stability in my life so I can devote myself full-time to getting better. Most people don't have that. And now I've finally come to terms with the fact fear is my biggest enemy. And it's been keeping me down for ages. The fear of facing myself, of letting go, of changing. I've been hurt so much and so badly. I've become terrified of getting hurt again. So I built all of the walls around myself to keep light from getting in. And by doing so, I kept myself from getting out.
I got it so wrong. I don't want to protect you from the world. I want to show it to you.
In the past few months, I've been slowly realizing that, yes, OCD and depression are two huge extra roadblocks I have to deal with. And they do and will absolutely make my life harder. And there's a lot of bad that's been a direct consequence to my actions because it took me a while to come to terms with that lesson Buffy tried to teach me, of how my pain doesn't excuse my shitty behavior and that it doesn't mean I won't have to deal with the aftermath of the choices I made when I was just trying to escape my pain. But a lot of my trauma and my pain also came as a consequence of living. It didn't happen to me because I have a bad brain, but because I'm human, and I've gone through a lot of experiences, bad and good, because that is just the way it works. That is life. Life isn't bliss. Life isn't hell. You can try to protect yourself from any and all possible bad without also depriving yourself from any and all possible good. And that is my main takeaway from Buffy's beautiful, dark, flawed 6th season. The one which now I am relaying to you. You can't hope to see the sunrise again if you don't crawl out of your grave. The hardest thing in this world is to live in it.